Welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo. We'll pick up from where we left off last week and continue our conversation on the fallout of the NSAS campaign. But this time around, we will be taking up issues with the Senior Special Assistant, Media and Publicity to the President. Of course, my colleague Elizabeth Omori is also on standby for the Media Review segment. Elizabeth?
Well, this week on the Media Review segment, we'll take a look at the role of a journalist in reporting crime and violence. And of course, our case study would be the aftermath of the NSAS protests.
Very well indeed. Let's get started with the discussion segment. I'm being joined by the Senior Special Assistant, Media and Publicity to the President, Garba Shehu. Welcome to Insight, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm sure in your quiet moment, you have reviewed some of the events revolving around the NSAS protest, and perhaps that gives you an opportunity to review the tack deployed by the protesters initially at the onset, and much later, of course, when the violent phase began. Let me begin by asking if you think this whole scenario could have been handled a lot better at the initial stage, perhaps by the government, considering how fluid the situation was at the time.
This is a government that is democratically elected, which accepts peaceful street protests as coming from citizen rights as given by the Constitution. So if the idea is that government should have crushed these protests as soon as they began, I think people are mistaken. Okay. Because democracy accepts that citizens have a right to peacefully protest against policy, to make their point in a manner that does not also abridge the rights of other citizens. If this protest had been confined to that, I think no one would have had any problems from the beginning to the end with it.
I am curious about your thoughts on who is responsible for how the NSAS campaign degenerated rather quickly into chaos. In many ways, the campaign has been blamed for what happened subsequently, and I mean the violence that followed, plus the vandalism and the looting. We saw how that happened in states across the Federation. Do you think those aggrieved young Nigerians who started out initially in a peaceful manner, you've said that, you've talked about our government did not clamp down on the protest, because government, and like the president actually made allusions to just yesterday, that it is their fundamental right to protest. But do you think those youths who also went through what they went through at the Lekki toll gate are somewhat responsible for what befell the country subsequently? Do you hold that same opinion as some people have said?
Up to an extent, I think that it can be said to be a shared blame. The noble objectives read out by the protesters from the commencement of the activity. You know, they had outlined 5 key issues which the government promptly accepted, including the fact that the SAS, which they had objected to, had been abolished and will never again to come back. However, having got all of the 5 elements that they put before government, all of them approved as requested, if there was wise leadership among the protesters, they should have retreated from the streets.
Okay.
I think that as is being clearly indicated by reviewers, they didn't have an exit strategy, and the exit strategy meaningfully would have been one that could have led from the street to the negotiation table.
Indeed.
But power, as it was diffused. There was no clear leadership. There was nobody, as much as government wanted to identify who to talk to. Whoever they pointed at and say, come forward, let's talk to you, they will say, I'm not a leader, and then they will recede and disappear into the crowd. So that said, then, of course, the hoodlums, the enemies of state, people who never really a lot of them criminals. You know that the Nigeria police has achieved a lot dealing with cyber criminality in the country. Look, Nigerians today have acquired so much reputation in cyber criminality that outside the country, in big cities like Chicago, United States of America, they are competing with mafia groups as to the dominance of cyber criminality in many cities of the world. So they have power, they have money, and they really were feeling the heat of the police activity all over the country. And so they came in and catched it on it and seized it and unleashed the kind of vandalism never seen before in the history of this country, which is a big tragedy.
Well, you brought up the issue of the lack of apparent leadership of the NSAS protest group, or the campaign as it were. Do you think, and I've asked this question time and time again with previous guests on this program, do you think the apparent lack of leadership of the group robbed that group of the power to perhaps negotiate more, or give it a stronger position, or make it, did that rob it the opportunity to come to the negotiating table and thus all of what we saw play out subsequently?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And if you have heard the president's speech on the 1st of November on the African Union Youth Day, the president was saying, as represented by the FCT minister, to the young people in this country, come forward, come to the table, sit down with us, let us discuss. Don't be afraid. That to protest, to disagree is a sign of strength, it's not a weakness. So I think that it is clear to government at this time that the youth leadership in the country also needs to be prompted, needs to be encouraged, to acquire the confidence that is needed to come and sit down face to face with the government and present their problems and discuss, engage the government in a dialogue, so that common solutions will be found, solutions that will be beneficial not only to the youths, but to the entire people of this country.
Most Nigerians are still reeling from the impacts of the protest, more particularly from the vandalism and looting which erupted in parts of the country. A lot of people are convinced and already aligned with justice being the underlying issue, whether remote or immediate, which gave rise to the protest. What are the feelers that you're getting from the state? And perhaps are you getting any news from youth representatives now in the states where the panel of inquiries are already sitting?
Well, it is important first of all to state clearly that the unfortunate incidents that unfolded in many of the capitals, looting of private and public property was totally uncalled for. And this country would reap the consequences of that, depending on how it is managed. Hopefully, this should never ever happen again, because from what we are hearing and reading, even those activists and the celebrities who spearheaded the NSAS protest, many of them have recoiled, and they are going back to say, well, if we knew this was what it was going to lead to, we would not have been a part of it. So there is regret. And for the country that is hungry for foreign capital, foreign investment, the foreign direct investment to come, and for you to attack business startups and foreign capitals and local investment, it's a terrible advertisement for the country. And I hope that this should never again happen.
I'll come to the issue of fake news and misrepresentation as we saw play out during the entire scenario. But then I'd also like to take you up on some really valid issues raised by young people in Nigeria today, even beyond the 5 for 5 demands, 12 for 12 demands raised by the NSAS group and the protesters are valid because whether we like it or not, as a nation, we must have these conversations, since we're on the path of development. They are raising the issue of increased inclusiveness, political inclusiveness. In fact, in all phases of life, they've also talked about youth unemployment and the seeming bloated size size and cost of government. These are not necessarily for the now, but how quickly can these conversations pick up pace, and then how can we begin to see some of these issues being attended to by the federal government?
Nobody denies the fact that this country has a youth bulge. We have a population that is growing faster than the rate of economic growth.
Very well, indeed.
Which means, in effect, that all efforts to grow the economy will continue to suffer setbacks. If you are recessed, you may continue to be in a recession for so long a time, because so long as the population growth exceeds the rate of economic growth, those achievements don't really count. So it is a problem for now, and as you say, it's a problem for the future. Even if this administration lives, we must have strategies to deal with problems of the youth. For the government of President Muhammadu Buhari, the strategy is simple and a straightforward one. Okay. He has identified agriculture as the biggest facilitator of recruitment and employment. And we are doing so well. Look, in this country today, you have clubs of graduates who have said, okay, we have acquired all the education in the university, let's keep the certificate aside, let's go and invest. Nobody who has gone into agriculture is regretting doing that. And don't forget that the government just unveiled a 75 billion naira youth investment fund. So the idea is, how many jobs can government itself provide? Government is doing well. NSAS, N-Power has just been increased from 450 or thereabout by another 500,000 and all of that. The government cannot, without active participation by private sector, without the financing and the funding of innovation and individual creativity by young Nigerians, we can't get out of unemployment. So I think that education should drive our young people to be towards creativity and innovation, so that on their own, when they leave campus, instead of seeking job, they'll be setting up. In fact, they become employees of labor instead of they being employees. And this is happening with many of our young people in the country today.
Very true. I mean, Nigerians are naturally very enterprising people, and we've seen young people schooled and unschooled, take up skills, and programs just to better themselves. Well, I'll give you more opportunity to talk about specific programs of government that have particularly and actively helped in bridging the seeming divide between government and the youth, especially in the political front. Of course, I know that the president gave assent to the Not Too Young to Run bill, which is now a law. Are there perhaps other ways that the government has, come forward to bridge the divide and cohort young people into governance and governance, basically, as it is?
Well, in our competitive politics, you know that the Constitution is very clear. As a matter of fact, as we have in the country today, the age barrier, at 35 you can be the president of this country. You can be the Senate president, you can be governor. Efforts have consistently been made and put in place in order to lower the age bracket so that younger people can mainstream themselves into the political process. Of course, there are complaints here and there, empowerment of money and all of that for people to make it. But the thing is that those who are strong, those who persist, you find that they're still making it. There's a young man I would cite here, the majority leader in the Gombe State House of Assembly, just finished NYSC. And you don't expect capital of the type that people go and invest in people. But the reputational capital that the young man had is what he took to his people. And they said, you come forward and go and lead. And before you know it, even among people who are older and all of that, they saw the leadership in him and they made him majority leader of that House of Assembly. So I think that it is, yes, the opportunities are there. Okay. What we need to do is enlighten people more and more and let them be encouraged so that they will seize on the opportunities and make the best of them.
Again, I'll go back to the president's remarks of yesterday, where he acknowledged, that youth or young people have the right to demand for accountability from government and some other issues that the president raised. In fact, I see that as an encouragement to the youth population in the country. Well, I'll ask you this, and this is quite, personal to you. Prior to the NSAS protest, would you have imagined that the young Nigerian adults can be that passionate about governance? And what is your view on the key, well, you've talked about that, the lack of leadership from the group, but I would like for you to speak to how best you think young Nigerians or, average Nigerian adults, young adults can strike a balance between, not taking to violence and demanding for what is rightfully theirs. Is there a balance? Is there a line that can be treaded or walked? I know it can be quite delicate, but how can young people walk that thin line?
Well, in this conversation you had earlier mentioned the issue of fake news and all of that, which has become a problem now, not only to Nigeria, but to the entire global community. And various nations across the globe, of course, are making efforts to evolve the jurisprudence that is necessary, that is required in order to mainstream, digital new media, which is principally responsible for the explosion of public awareness that we have seen. Because, prior to this time, you depended on, you had to wait maybe for the 9 o'clock network news of the NTA to understand what is going on, or the FRCN at 7 a.m., or the newspaper in the morning. Now, information is given to you in your handheld telephone, and as fast as it happens, much earlier than the mainstream media. So it is to tell you that you are dealing with an entirely changed political and the ecosystem in the country. Young people have access to information that they can use. Sadly for the country then is that there is much of it that is misleading. And I think that this is the challenge upon those of us who happen to be around people in government, who and the parliament in particular, and all of the stakeholders, the bloggers, the online publishers, and all of that, so that at some point I think that all of us need to come together, okay, so that we agree on what to do. There is a stakeholder conference that will say this is the way to do it. It shouldn't be government doing it top-bottom, in a top-bottom approach. But we need to do something urgently in order that we avert these situations we have witnessed on account of the spread of fake news, as we have seen.
I'll take that. Well, finally, before I let you go, Malam Shehu, I'd like for you to speak directly to a group of persons. First, to those who may have lost someone in the last few weeks, arising from the violence which engulfed the NSAS protest. 2, to the young Nigerian adults still aggrieved and eager to register his or her displeasure. Then thirdly and lastly, to the larger population still reeling from the impact of the entire fiasco. Can you start from 1?
Yeah, well, I think that I have said it, and what did I do? I was borrowing from the words of the president in his speech to the young people on the African Union Youth Day. So you have made your point, and the government has conceded to you that you have made this point. And the president said, we accept you have a point. So the thing then to do is come forward, sit around the table with our leaders, and let there be a resolution of the problems that bother you.
You've just addressed 2. You skipped 1. 1 is to the family that has lost someone.
Well, yes, the family, yes. We would say our deepest condolences to them. And I must say also that there are 2 sets of victims. There are
Yes.
victims on the side of the protesters. There are also victims on the side of law enforcement.
Yes.
And in other countries, perhaps it's almost treasonable for anyone to attack or even kill law enforcement agent. You can't do this in the United States and think you get away lightly with it. So people should not underrate what has happened to the police. So our sympathies for all of them, the NSAS protesters and law enforcement, and may this never again happen.
And please, to Nigerians still reeling from the impact of the entire fiasco.
Nigerians we really have a big challenge before us. In fact, this is an economy that has been recessed on account of COVID, and the president has projected optimistically that this country's economy will emerge from recession by the first quarter of 2021. This riot is a major setback. What does this mean? What this means is that we have to work extra hard, roll up our sleeves and see that the economy does not recess beyond the first quarter of next year. Otherwise, it will be horrible. It will be terrible for the country.
Garba Shehu, Senior Special Assistant, Media and Publicity to the President, I want to thank you so much for coming on Insight and wish you the very best.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity.
We will continue the conversation on the fallout of the NSAS protest and the way forward. But this time, Dr. Mukhtar Imam from Base University, Abuja, joins me via Zoom. Welcome to Insight, Dr. Imam.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm not going to do the blame game here, Dr. Imam, but instead I would like for us to look at some of the underlying issues which have been highlighted by the entire scenario that has played out from the beginning of the initial peaceful protest to the unfortunate phase, rather unfortunate phase of vandalism and looting. There is the issue of justice, and at this point I would think it should be justice for all involved. I'm sure you're familiar with the late elder statesman, Maitama Sule's quote on crisis and justice. He once said that, and I'll paraphrase here, he said, behind every crisis, there's the issue of justice, and the solution to the crisis is justice. Do you think that is applicable in this case that we have on our hands, and can justice be meted out to all that have been impacted, beginning, of course, from victims of police brutality to officers of the police attacked and killed, and also those whose businesses have been looted?
Yes, thank you very much. It's quite a complicated scenario and an unfortunate one. It's one we shouldn't have seen in the first place. But again, like the elder statesman, God rest his soul, Alhaji Maitama Sule, once asserted to, that in every crisis situation, you find that the underlying drivers is always or surrounds the problems of justice and injustice. Societies don't thrive without having some level of justice, fairness, and equality and equity meted out to the people. As a matter of fact, these are part of the characteristics, if you like, of the social contract theory. States exist first and foremost to protect the interest of their people, to be able to equitably distribute resources amongst their people. That's why we have authorities over us. Well, in the case of the NSAS protest, and even before, because the issue of this protest was seen today, has some undertone to it. There are basically underlying issues that have driven this protest to where we have gotten to currently. This protest did not just start today. It started years ago. The 2015 general election, if you like, was part of the test as well. It was people saying we were tired of a particular administration and were facing them out. This is not to cast aspersion on any administration, but this is to state the facts. So basically, this is what we're seeing playing out till present day. And again, like I said, underlining all of these issues are certain fundamental problems that requires attention. These problems span from problem of income inequality to the huge and widening and continuous widening gap in wealth distribution. These are the fundamental issues that have basically driven people, not necessarily youths, because this protest wasn't just about young people. It was about people of good conscience, if you like. it came under the guise of police brutality and NSAS. We've seen it play out, unfortunately, along the line, just as you would have with every protest situation that is not handled properly. It naturally snowballs into this kind of unfortunate scenarios. And then we saw the looting and the arson and all these other things happening. As far as meting out justice to victims of this crisis is concerned, I am sure government will do the most that it can. I hope it does. The reason why I use the word sure is because we have seen the proactiveness of government by setting up the judicial panels of inquiry, or committees rather of inquiry, to look at the issues surrounding the brutality of SARS in the past. And of course, I'm sure that's going to also factor in the losses that were incurred by all stakeholders in the course of the unfolding of the conflict that degenerated into the looting and the thievery that we saw in the last.
Dr. Imam, I'm compelled to ask if you think the seeming prolonged detachment of the Nigerian youth from governance and active politics might have informed some level of miscomprehension between that strata of the population and older politicians. I'm sure you've seen the reaction from of the Lagos State House of Assembly to the NSAS protest. Again, no blame games here, but does that make you wonder where we are at the moment and how that conforms to the narrative, or helps us to describe the narrative of public representatives being the people's mouthpiece, essentially?
Well, that's very correct. It is as you have put it, but what we must understand is that in every crisis situation, there are always intricacies, there are always complexities to it, and so one has to be extremely careful and cautious when dealing with crisis situation. Utterances that are made, particularly from people in position of authority, have to be guarded. Because the reality is, you could say things. Words are very powerful. You could say things that could be taken in the wrong way, and then you find people running away with them. But go to your first point: the involvement of the youth in governance. That's the reason why we find that this whole generational gap, and all of the things in between, and our thought processes and the way we perceive of things are actually different. We see things from different paradigms. I once conducted a survey on youth involvement in governance for Westminster Foundation for Democracy. And I did a pilot test in Kaduna and in Abuja and in Lagos. And part of the submissions from that survey was there are issues of mistrust between the older generation and, of course, the younger generation as far as governance and holding on to position of authority is concerned. So these misgivings are basically there. But then, again, we have seen that part of the reasons that have led us to where we are, that have fueled and driven this protest and demonstrations all around, are the deficits we face in different spheres of society. There's a deficit, of course, in governance. There's a deficit in development, which has snowballed into creating a deficit in peace. Young people, you find that the vast majority of young people are disengaged, are misinformed or ill-informed, do not or are not brought into decision-making processes. There's the notion of the circulation of elites in our political space, and this shouldn't be the case. But to be fair to the older generation, I think the young people need to begin to pick it up from this moment.
Indeed,
I think we need to begin to think strategically. We need to begin to act tactfully. And by doing this, what we must do is that we must become part of the decision-making processes. We must find a way to come to the table where policies are made, because that's the only way you can actually make any meaningful impact. By getting involved, by getting your hands dirty. Nobody gives power. You must take it. You must become a part of the process that basically... But
then how do you become part of the process if there's a seeming detachment? Dr. Imam, parallel to the NSAS protest, as in when the youth actually took to the streets, would you have believed that the average Nigerian youth would be that passionate about governance and politics?
It's always been there. From this survey, I'd refer again to the survey I carried out. The enthusiasm I saw with the young people that I interacted with was overwhelming. It proved the point that young people are actually very keen about political events and events, whatever is around the political sphere in this country. It's just that, again, certain variables have limited them. There are a lot of limitations, from finances to cultural issues to the godfatherism that has become so rampant in the Nigerian political space, and a couple of other factors, and of course, tied to that is also the problem of misinformation. We need to equip ourselves with information. We need to be educated. Education is not just about running around the four walls of institutions of higher learning. It's about being conscious of your environment. So these are some of the things I feel that the young people need to do. As far as enthusiasm is concerned, in fact, I will tell you, authoritatively, with all sense of consciousness, that the young people are very keen about politics in this country, and we should see a lot more of them jump into the political space.
You and I are going to talk a lot. I'm going to talk some more about these variables and factors you just made allusions to. I want to believe that, of course, you and I do not live in an alternate universe, and so we cannot begin to feign ignorance that there are fundamental issues with youth development in Nigeria, whether in education or in business, like you've just said. Again, let's looking at the root causes of why young people are straying from the path and indulging in vices like criminal activities, drug abuse. There's also prostitution there, and like we saw during the violent phase of the protest, we saw vandalism and looting. And sometimes they do these things as ways of suppressing what society throws at them. Do you concur with people who say it is mostly because the youths are idle, and so the idle mind is the devil's workshop?
Well, you could say that. The reality is there's no social ill that has a straight jacket or a particular phenomenon that drives it. So also you cannot have a single solution to any social ills. As far as societal problems are concerned, they are multifaceted, they are multidimensional, and they are multi-layered. And you must look at these different scenarios independently and, of course, collectively to be able to understand the trigger, the factors that drive them, and so on and so forth. The reality is we're seeing a lot of these social ills on the rise. Drug addiction has reached a level the world has never seen before on a global scale. Prostitution, cybercrime, and so on and so forth. And these things are perpetrated largely by young people. But I'll give you one dimension of the argument. I was having a conversation in 2018, that is, with the Minister of Culture and Tourism in China, their Minister of Culture and Tourism. And he told me, he said he has seen brazen statistics, startling figures that prove that a lot of Nigerian youths are in different parts of the world committing all kinds of illegal activities and so on. And that some professors, older people, that's it, from my country, have also concurred to the fact that this is the case. Now, in the defense of the youth, what I told him was this, that, you see, Nigerian youth are entrepreneurial. We have entrepreneurship skills in our DNA. And so it budges, it drives. We want to find ourselves being productive. And I told him, I said, look around you, go around the world and take statistics of people who have excelled in their different fortes and professions around the world. You will find that a lot of these young people are Nigerians as well. So what we need, as a matter of fact, is an enabling environment where people can strive, thereby thrive. Now, this enabling environment, where you find that it is not created or it is insufficient, it drives people to all kinds of illegal, social ills. Nigerian youth are very, very industrious. Now, I told the same individual I'm talking about here that China doesn't have half the mineral resources we have in Nigeria. The one thing that China has and has been able to manage sufficiently is its human population or human resource. Now, this is where we need to begin to refocus our energy. Government needs to begin to rethink. Look, yesterday's learning and today's learning will never be the same. When we talk about education, we're talking about functional literacy. There's the need to take this chunk of population. Population is resources. It's also a time bomb. When you leave people without means of wealth generation, with a damning, low in income generation, and so on and so forth. The reality is that this is the sort of outcome you have, a negative one, of course. So while this is on the rise, the social ills and so on and so forth, government needs to do a lot more. And that's why I talked about the deficit in development. In that deficit, I'm talking about human capacity deficit and, of course, infrastructural development deficit. There's a need for government to begin to bridge the gap. And when we talk about government, we're talking about government at all tiers. And we're also not referring to just this particular administration. The problem that we're talking about here is a corollary or a consequence of decades of decay. It did not start today.
Of course.
You would recall that there was a former head of state of this country who once asserted that Nigeria's problem is not money, but how to spend the money. Fast forward some years down the line, and look where we are. And rightly so, he was absolutely correct at the time. But fast forward down the line and see where we are. Now, it tells you that there was a huge mismanagement of public funds, that has basically taken shape within that time that statement was made and where we currently are. So these resources have to begin to be rechanneled into developing young people between the ages of 18 and 40 or 45 are the engine room of growth of any society. And so we must take advantage of our own population.
Dr. Imam, you've raised the issue of functional, if I'm correct, you said functional education. I came across, and please help me put this in context. I came across the tweets by popular social entrepreneur and human development expert, Toyosi Akerele Ogunsiju, a couple of days ago, and I found it quite intriguing and profound. If you'd allow me, let me just read it out to you. She tweeted, and I quote, "I am really, really worried that so many young people in Nigeria cannot read to understand clearly why some do not even have the patience to read. The level of ignorance in these parts is really astonishing. This is a deeply systemic and destructive problem in the long term." End of quote. So I get a sense that when she says read and understand clearly, she might be making an inference to the lopsidedness in the quality of education in Nigeria and how keen or eager an average Nigerian youth is to educate him or herself. I mean, you mentioned that earlier. Can you put that in proper context for us, and feel free to tell me if I am wrong when I say that education, if properly channeled, can help fix Nigeria?
Exactly. You see, of all the issues we talk about, economic problems, micro and macroeconomic challenges, we talk about a couple of other issues. You see, the most political system of governance, you hear people talk about the need to restructure and so on and so forth. For me, the fundamental thing that requires attention is, and which I see is the basis of our problem in this country, is the social psychological standing of our people. And around that is our sociological understanding. Around that is our cultural understanding. Around that is our educational understanding. Whether you're putting it in the context of functional literacy I mentioned earlier, or you're putting it in the context of going through schools of or institutions of learning to be able to acquire knowledge through the books and so on and so forth. But there's a need to also contextualize the quotes you just made of that individual. You see, there's a distinction between reading and writing. There's a distinction between being lettered and also being educated. We must try to draw the line and have an understanding of that. So when I talk about functional literacy, it goes beyond just reading and writing. Quite frankly, we have a lot of reading and writing illiterates working amidst us. That's the truth. And a lot of these individuals constitute the unrepentant ethnic warlords we find around us. They constitute part of the religious chauvinists and bigots we have around us, yet they're lettered. So we must draw the line between being lettered and being educated. Like I said in the beginning, education is your ability to be conscious of your environment, understand what is happening, being able to apply that knowledge you have to the betterment of the society around you. Education is very key in whatever form you look at it, whether in the context of being lettered or in the context of being aware and being conscious of what is happening around you. Because it is said that the people are as good as their educational system. Now, where you find that people cannot be productive as far as learning is concerned, the reality is you're going to have a huge gap as far as every issue around societal problems are concerned. It was once asserted that if people do not understand where they're coming from, that is being educated, they would have opened up a fight between their present and their future. This is what I tell my students often at times in class. You find young people making the argument about Mark Zuckerberg and the other guy dropping out of university. I ask them, did they drop out of UI or Unilag or Base University? No, they didn't. You must understand the context of the environment in which you live. Equip yourself with knowledge. If you're not informed, the reality is you will have nothing to offer. Zuckerberg did not sit on his hands and create Facebook. He had to read.
Very true.
Bill Gates, who they always point fingers to and all of that, has said, I don't know if that is true, that the least he goes is a book a week. So we need to begin to inform ourselves. We need to understand that. You go out there and ask an average Nigerian what a budget is, he doesn't understand what it means. I mean, I'm talking about some people in amongst our population, and these are young people who constantly talk about agitation for change and generational change and power shift and so on and so forth. So education is very important.
Dr. Mukhtar Imam, I'm sorry, but we're completely out of time. I would have loved for us to continue this conversation, but we're out of time already. You've been an absolute delight. I would like to thank you very much indeed for giving us time and, I mean, getting your insight on some of these issues. I'd like to also wish you the very best. Thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you for having me. I'm on board. Thank you.
Yeah. Up next is Elizabeth Omoruyi with the Media Review segment.
Journalists help to break the silence and take issues out of the private sphere where it is still too often relegated. The public have tremendous interest in crime stories, and the media cannot afford to ignore them. In the past few weeks, the credibility of the media in Nigeria has been tested. How have they fared reporting crime and violence in Nigeria? My guests, Ignatius Oshe, Assistant Editor, Transfer Day, and Opoku Ogenyi, National Coordinator, Coalition for Good Governance and Change Initiative, will provide answers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, I would like to start with a media practitioner amongst us. I would like to start with Mr. Ignatius. For some weeks now, Nigerian journalists have been on their toes reporting the aftermath of the NSAS protest that was hijacked. What's your position and how would you assess reportage?
Okay, thank you very much, Lizzie. I want to begin my conversation basically by talking about, taking it from two angles.
Okay.
The first, I want our audience to understand the new media, which is made up of the social media, and then the conventional means of information, the radio, television, and newspaper, the print. In the new normal, which is the social media, there's something I would like to say, and that is that most of the information that comes out from the social media are, let me use the word, barely verifiable.
Okay.
So, in some cases, or in more cases, we discover that most of the informations that comes out are, I don't want to say they are not right, but they are not, the editors and people that are working on these informations don't even have the time to verify this information before they put it in the open space. But in the radio, which is the traditional or conventional, you discover that even when you go out there as a reporter and you bring in story to the newsroom, you have opportunity to verify, to listen or get from both sides before your information comes out. If I want to relate it to what just happened or what has been happening in the country in the last few days, you discover that most of the informations we have on the social media, in some cases they seem to contradict with what the traditional or the conventional media comes up with.
All right, Mr. Ignatius, I'll come back to you. Mr. Opoku, you are a youth advocate. You work with the youth. You are youth as well, if I'm permitted to say.
Yes,
now, let's talk about the rate of destruction.
Truly, the destructions that that follow up the NSAS protests in the country is uncalled for.
Okay.
To be very frank, the protesters at the initial stage, we are all Nigerians, and we're all protesting the police brutality in the country. We also protested to ensure that there is a reform, proper reform of the Nigeria police system, and which from the 5-point agenda of the original NSAS protests, the police is even the major beneficiary, which come up with the presidential panel on police reform and all of that, with the police fund, institution of the police fund, and so many other benefits coming to the police. But enemies of the country hijacked the process and began to inflict violence by destroying properties and lives, which is truly uncalled for. And these violence are also orchestrated by the youth. The same youth, like in Lagos today, the BRT were burned down, and today people are stranded. They can no longer move freely.
Of course.
The downfall have increased from 150 naira of BRT to 1,500 naira. You can see so many damages, destruction, TVC station destroyed, NTA office destroyed, so many things. The destruction in Lagos is over 1 trillion naira if you want to put them together. And they were all orchestrated by the same youth. And I have come to also understand that the government, this present government, is a very focused, youth-focused administration, whereby there are so many programs for the youth, like the 75 billion naira Youth Empowerment Fund. We talk about the Empower programs and the agricultural grant and so many other things that the government is doing for the youth.
I would like Mr. Ignatius to comment on the issue.
Fortunately, this thing happened, I was in Lagos.
Okay.
And just like I said earlier, in as much as our youth or the youths of this nation today, I see them as the most priceless resources that this country has. But there is something every youth of this country need to take home. And what is that? In as much as they are the people we are depending on to see how we can have a better Nigeria tomorrow. One of the things the present leadership must note is that they need to do something that will quell the anger.
Okay, let me draw your attention to the psychological implication of what we see here and then what we share on the social media, even on the conventional media. You are a media practitioner.
Yes.
What are the implications?
One,
because we understand that some TV stations have been sanctioned.
I think in the FCT Council of NUJ, we came up with a statement on that.
Okay.
And what is that? Especially the social media, the new normal. A youth that lives in Sabogidara or in Ogoja, where I come from, has a smartphone that is handy, that in 2 seconds, whatever thing you put on the social media, he can hear and react immediately.
Of course.
And then, but when you when you bring a story into a studio like where we are talking today, it goes through sub-editors, it goes through a process to either verify those information before we put it on the social space. We have the people that are supposed to monitor this information. What is my advice to either editors, bloggers, or people that run some of this? It's not every information that you get and you just throw into the public space. There are information that when it comes, either as a media person, you analyze and see or weigh both the psychological and physical implication of that, either to the economy or to the country, before you throw to the public space.
So at what point would you say verification is key?
Beautiful. Verification is, I would say verification is key even at the point of, at the point of every information. Because, for instance now, I think they have been talking about this fake news, what. we need to sensitize not only the people that are even bringing this information, but even those of us in the practice. You know, there are some information that you get, and even you know that what I am hearing is mere rumor.
Not true.
Not true. But in the social media, somebody just hears something, the next 2 minutes you are typing something, you are posting, even before you bring that stuff down. Millions have had it.
It's gone far.
It's gone very far. What I'm saying is that I feel editors or anybody that is is involved in information management, anytime you get any information that is not verifiable, I feel you should put it down.
Okay. All right, Mr. Okwoko, across the globe, the youths play an important role in population and development. Considering the last civil unrest we experienced, how do you think we can fix citizen-government disconnects?
Thank you very much. The major way to fix the citizen-government connection is for the state government to do its work.
Okay.
Now, all responsibilities are on the federal government. You agree with me that the federal government is just one, will have just one president. I will have 36 governors plus one FCT minister, making it 37. So if all the 36 governors are performing their duty as it's supposed to be, there wouldn't be such a burden on the federal government. Even local government chairmen should do their job. And this should be the campaign we should take on. This is the first time in Nigeria history that people will get enrolled in government programs without knowing anybody in the system. We should be able to hold the governors accountable and our governors responsible. And part of the issues we have is that the youth, when we say the youth, is a person who just look at the people you see on the street. Most of these youth are also gainfully engaged. Okay. Like even in the social media that we talk about social media influencers, they are youth. You talk about so many celebrities, they are youth. So these youth are also gainfully employed in one way or the other. But this is a period that Nigerians are supposed to go into sober reflection to check in depth the cause of this unrest and how it has led us to. The federal government and the state government need to send their effort to ensure that we have a proper youth reorientation in the country.
Okay.
And yes.
All right, I'm sorry I have to cut you there. Mr. Ignatius, quickly, just in 20 seconds.
Good.
Are we under-reporting crime and violence?
I would say yes, I would say no.
Okay.
But I would still emphasize that rather than report anything, we should report verifiable crimes.
We should report verifiable
crimes. We shouldn't, as professionals, we shouldn't base our reportage on hearsay. We should report things that at the end of the day, when you go there, you see it.
Mr. Okwoko, your final words to the youths.
Yes, as a youth myself, I would advise my fellow youth to be steadfast. Believe in the system, believe in Nigeria. Think of what you can do for Nigeria, know what Nigeria can do for you. Togetherness, we shall be able to build a united nation. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ignatius?
I still will go by what my brother have said, but the point I will make or add there is that the present government need to act now and immediate.
All right, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on Inside this week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome.
And that's it on the Media Review segment.
And this is where we draw the curtain on this episode of the program. It's been quite an insightful one. My name is Nnamdi Odipo. Do join us same time next week for more on Insight.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Do embrace peace always. We'll see you next week.